Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Legal Learning Thursdays. On this edition of Legal Learning, we're going to learn about human trafficking. My name is Victoria Sexton, and I'm an attorney at Coast to Coast Legal Aid, and I represent survivors of human trafficking and civil litigation. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start off with some statistics, facts, and myths about trafficking. So first, in 2016, it was estimated that 40 million people were victims of human trafficking. And we know this is a grossly underreported crime. So this number is probably nowhere near the actual number of people that are affected. It's both international and domestic. So I think a lot of times we think human trafficking happens in third world countries or in other nations, but it's important to remember that it happens here in America. And that is shown in our next statistic, which shows that Florida ranks third in the country for human trafficking. And South Florida specifically is considered a hub or a hotspot for human trafficking. And this is primarily due to the international ports and airports, illustrious nightlife, and sporting events that we see in the Tri-County area. Things that human trafficking is not. It's not the movie Taken. I think a lot of us saw that movie and thought, it's vans that pull up and grab people and they're in cellars and they're in shackles and they're in blindfolds. And while that may be true for some cases, that's not the case a lot of the times. And it's not the case with trafficking in our community. So just remember that. Next slide. I did want to go over some distinctions within the federal definition. So the federal definition of human trafficking is found in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which has been around for 20 years. So you'll see that sex trafficking is kind of bifurcated with minors and adults. So you'll see that it's a commercial sex act that's induced by force, fraud, or coercion for adults. And then for minors, you don't have to prove one of those three. Then with labor trafficking, you see that the use of force, fraud, or coercion is necessary for both minors and adults. That's just something to keep in mind in the definition of human trafficking. Next, we're going to focus on who are the traffickers and who are the victims. Again, I think we have this perception in society that traffickers are these hardened criminals, but that's not the case. A lot of times we see that traffickers are parents, family members like uncles and aunts, friends, neighbors, strangers that we meet on social media, public officials like law enforcement officers or doctors. It really can be anyone. And the same thing with victims. We see victims of any race, gender, sexual orientation, both domestic and foreign nationals, foster kids, community kids, and individuals of all socioeconomic statuses. So just remember, when it comes to the crime of human trafficking, it does not discriminate. Slide. I wanted to kind of review some of the common legal services that survivors need. So starting with immigration, a lot of times with foreign nationals, if they were brought into the country illegally, they may not have legal status. So they may need immigration help with a T visa or U visa or other form of immigration relief. Then there's victim rights and representation. So oftentimes with survivors of human trafficking in prosecution against their traffickers, law enforcement and the prosecution needs them to do testimony or to work with them and cooperate. So it's really important that the victims' rights are being represented. And that's something we do here at CCLA. We have an amazing unit called the RISE unit, and they represent victims of crimes and criminal cases. And then lastly, we have civil legal services, which is what I do with survivors. And this really can be anything. It is survivor informed. So it could be something as simple as a name change to a divorce, paternity, it could be child support, anything like that, expungements. We kind of base it on whatever the survivor needs. So those are just a few of the legal services that are common for survivors of human trafficking. So what should you do if you suspect someone is being trafficked? Again, not the movie Taken. Don't approach the trafficker. Don't try to do any investigation. What you should do is call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And the number is listed on the next slide. It's 1-888-3737-888. And you can call the hotline, and they're amazing because they'll work with local law enforcement and with federal partners. And if you call in a tip, they'll either go out and verify it or unsubstantiate it. Additionally, they work with local service providers. So if a tip is verified, they can connect the survivor with service providers to assist them with any needs they need. If you suspect that a minor is being trafficked, you should call the Florida Child Abuse Hotline, and the number is also listed below and will be listed in the chat. Thanks for joining us for this week's Legal Learning. Next week is January 28th at 12 p.m. and we'll be focusing on healthcare access. Please remember to like and follow us on Facebook and YouTube at Coast to Coast Legal Aid. And my contact information is listed. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.